Chapter 1. Shadows in the night. Adrian Blackthorn moved through the darkened alley with a predator's grace. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The city around him slept, unaware of the violence that thrived in its shadows. Tonight had been another mission completed with cold precision. No mistakes, no hesitation, only results. The streets were slick with rain, and the dim glow of streetlights reflected on the puddles like shards of shattered glass. He paused at the corner, listening to the distant hum of the city. Normally, he would have melted into the night, leaving no trace of his presence. Yet something pulled at the edge of his awareness. A soft sound, almost gentle enough to be ignored, carried through the damp air. Curiosity and caution warred within him. He stepped closer. There she was, Lily Evans. She moved with quiet purpose, carrying a small bag of groceries, her hair falling around her face in a loose wave that caught the streetlight. Her expression was focused but serene, entirely unaware of the dangerous man watching her from the shadows. Adrian felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. He could not name it, but it unsettled him. She stumbled slightly on the slick pavement, and without thinking, Adrian stepped forward, his presence suddenly at her side. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide, untrusting, and the moment froze him in place. There was no fear in her gaze, only surprise and a faint curiosity that seemed to reach straight into him. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, carrying authority, but a softness he had never intended to show anyone. Lily nodded quickly, regaining her balance. "Yes, thank you," she replied. Her voice was calm, soothing, and it resonated in a way he had long forgotten existed in his life. He watched her for a moment longer, the quiet of the night enveloping them, and he realized that he could no longer retreat into the shadows as easily as he once did. As she continued on her way, Adrian did not follow. He did not need to. Yet something in him stirred, a heartbeat long buried beneath years of darkness. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he allowed himself to hope that the night might hold more than missions and survival. And as he disappeared back into the alley, blending with the darkness once more, he could not shake the thought of the kind-hearted nurse who had walked unknowingly into the path of a killer. Chapter 2. A glimpse of light. Adrian woke to the sting of pain in his side. The memory of the skirmish still raw in his muscles. The city felt different this morning, quieter somehow, as if it too had held its breath while he endured the night's chaos. He had expected solitude, a chance to lick his wounds alone, but fate had other plans. Lily Evans knelt beside him, her hands gentle. She pressed a clean cloth to the small cut along his ribs. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, and the soft sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the warmth in her expression. Adrian found himself watching her, captivated by the ease with which she moved, the quiet authority in her care. "Careful," he muttered, his voice rough from the tension and pain. "You shouldn't be here." Her lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "And you shouldn't be lying here like this," she said softly. "You could have made it worse if you didn't take care of the wound." He let out a low hum of acknowledgement. The words were simple, but the way she said them, without fear or judgment, unsettled him. No one had ever looked at him like that before, and he was unsure how to respond. As she worked, Adrian noticed the faint scent of soap and something floral in her hair. It was grounding, a stark contrast to the blood, sweat, and danger that usually surrounded him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond the endless missions and violence, a life where someone cared enough to see the man beneath the killer. Lily paused for a moment and met his eyes. "You're tense," she observed quietly. "It's all right to let someone help you." Her words struck him in a way that no threat or mission ever had. Trust had always been a weakness, a liability, and yet, here he was, letting her see him vulnerable. The world outside might be cruel, but in this small, sunlit room, there was a fleeting sense of safety he had not known existed. As she bandaged the wound, Adrian realized that he was not just drawn to her kindness, he was drawn to the light she carried effortlessly. A fragile hope began to grow in his chest, fragile but insistent, that perhaps, Even someone like him could be worthy of connection. When she finally stepped back, wiping her hands on a towel, he said nothing, but the look in his eyes was an unspoken acknowledgement. Something was shifting inside him. The shadows he had trusted for so long were still there, but they felt a little less permanent, and for the first time, he considered stepping towards something he had always thought impossible. Chapter 3. Echoes of the past. Adrian could feel the weight of his life pressing in from all sides. The city's shadows no longer felt like allies, but constant reminders of the choices he had made, the lives he had taken, and the walls he had built around himself. Yet, when he thought of Lily Evans, the nurse with the kind eyes and gentle hands, a strange warmth pierced through the darkness. Fragile and unexpected, he saw her again that evening at the small clinic where she worked, arranging supplies with her usual quiet focus, the scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint hint of flowers that always seemed to linger around her. Adrian felt exposed, as if merely being near her made the secrets he had buried start to crawl to the surface. "Adrian," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that was almost painful in its contrast to the life he knew. "You should not be out like this." He tried to shrug off her concern, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "I can handle myself," he said, but the words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his, patient and unwavering. "I know you can," she said, "but that doesn't mean you have to be alone. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had spent so long believing that anyone who drew near would be consumed by the darkness of his world. And yet, here she was, offering trust and care without hesitation. He wanted to tell her to leave, to protect her from what he truly was. But the thought of her turning away was unbearable. Later, in the quiet of his apartment, Adrian sat alone, replaying the events of the day. The mission earlier that week had left him shaken. He had always believed that his life could not intersect with someone innocent without causing harm. Now, with Lily's presence lingering in his mind, he realized how much he had been denying himself the possibility of connection. Memories of past betrayals, of allies lost and enemies won at terrible cost, haunted him. Every time he had tried to care for someone, the outcome had been pain. But Lily was different. Her gentle insistence on seeing the man behind the reputation hear him question the rigid boundaries he had drawn around his heart. Adrian knew the risks. He knew that danger could reach her at any moment simply by his association, but he could not stop the pull he felt toward her. It was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit that perhaps he could want something more than survival and control. In the quiet that followed, Adrian made a silent promise. He would protect her, even if it meant facing the demons of his past. And maybe, just maybe, in allowing someone to see his heart, he could discover a version of himself he had long believed lost forever. Chapter 4. A heart divided. Adrian paced his apartment late at night. The hum of the city outside, like a constant reminder of the world he could never fully escape. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound amplified. He was a man trained to anticipate threats. Yet lately, his greatest danger felt less external and more inside him. Lily Evans had unsettled him in ways he could neither predict nor control. He remembered her laugh, the softness of her hands as they had pressed the bandage to his wound, and the way her eyes had held his gaze without fear. He wanted to retreat, to shut himself away in the only place he felt safe, the darkness he had mastered over years of survival. But the thought of avoiding her felt impossible, as though part of him would wither without her presence. The next day, their paths crossed again by chance. She was carrying groceries back to her apartment, humming softly to herself. Adrian's chest tightened. He could feel the pull to step away, to remain the distant shadow he had always been. But when she looked up and met his eyes, offering a small, warm smile, something inside him wavered. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said, her voice gentle, but with a hint of teasing that made his heart constrict. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice lower than he intended. He wanted to tell her to stay away, to protect her from the consequences of knowing him, but the words caught in his throat. The following nights were restless. Adrian's mind replayed every detail of their encounters, every glance and word, and for the first time in years, he wondered if he could have something other than solitude and survival. But the reality of his life was unyielding. Rival factions in the criminal underworld had begun to notice cracks in his defenses. A careless move, a single misstep, and anyone connected to him could be in danger. He tried to reconcile his growing feelings with the truth of his existence. But every attempt only deepened the ache in his chest. To care for Lily was to invite vulnerability, and vulnerability had always been a luxury he could not afford. Yet every time he imagined her out of his life, even for a day, the thought was unbearable. Adrian's nights grew longer, filled with shadows and memories of violence, yet always punctuated by the image of Lily's soft smile. His heart, so long hardened by necessity and fear, began to divide itself between the instinct to protect and the instinct to flee. Each time he came close to making a decision, the tension between danger and desire grew, pulling him into directions at once. By the time the sun rose, he knew only one thing for certain. He could not fully turn away from her, no matter the risk. She had touched a part of him that he had buried deep, and now, whether he wanted to or not, his heart was in conflict. He was a killer by trade, a man forged in shadows, yet for Lily, he felt the stirring of something dangerously close to hope. Chapter 5. Unlikely confessions. Rain fell softly against the window pane as Adrian sat across from Lily in her small kitchen, the room glowing with the warmth of a single lamp. He had resisted her invitations for days, telling himself it was safer to keep his distance. But something in her voice, calm and insistent, had drawn him here. The sound of her laughter as she poured tea made his chest tighten in a way he did not understand. "I never asked," she said quietly, placing a cup in front of him. "What brought you here, truly?" Adrian froze. The question was simple, yet it carried the weight of trust he was unprepared to earn. He had spent his life concealing the truth, hiding behind cold efficiency and the reputation of a killer. Yet now, looking at her open, expectant face, he felt the urge to let a piece of himself show. He began, but words faltered. He had rehearsed these confessions countless times in his mind, yet none felt right when spoken aloud. "I have done things," he finally said, his voice low, "that no one should ever know." Her eyes softened, never judging, only encouraging. "Then start with one thing," she said. "I don't need to know everything at once." The restraint that had been a part of him for so long began to crumble. He spoke quietly, carefully, recounting moments that still haunted him, choices made in the name of survival, missions that had demanded a ruthlessness he despised, but could not abandon. Each word was a step closer to vulnerability, each sentence a surrender of the shield he had carried for so many years. Lily listened without interruption, her gaze unwavering. When he finished, the silence stretched between them, not heavy, but alive with understanding. "I don't see a killer in front of me," she said softly, her hand reaching across the table to brush his. "I see a man who has lived with too much alone, and is finally letting someone in." For the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to breathe without the constant tension of vigilance. The warmth of her hand, the certainty in her voice, grounded him in a way he had never known possible. His walls, built from years of fear and necessity, began to crack, revealing the man beneath the reputation. "You make it sound so simple," he murmured, half in disbelief, half in awe. "It doesn't have to be simple," she replied, smiling. "It just has to be honest." That night, as he left her apartment, Adrian felt something unfamiliar fluttering within him. It was tender, fragile, and intoxicating, a connection that promised more than fleeting encounters in shadows. Their bond had shifted from curiosity to trust, from trust to the beginnings of something delicate and beautiful. And for the first time, Adrian allowed himself to hope that love could exist even for someone like him. Chapter 6. Danger in the shadows. Adrian felt it before he saw it. The subtle shift in the air, the faint echo of footsteps that did not belong to the quiet city around him. His instincts, honed over years of survival, flared like warning lights in his mind. Danger had a way of finding him, and now it threatened not just himself, but the one person he could not bear to lose. Lily had been insisting on accompanying him to a pharmacy on the far side of the city. Adrian had argued against it, insisting she stay safely behind closed doors, but her stubborn insistence had won. She had wanted to help, to be a part of his world, and he had not had the courage to say no. Now, as shadows lengthened and the streets emptied, he realized the risk she had taken simply by being near him. A black sedan slowed at the intersection ahead, and Adrian's gut twisted. He moved instinctively, stepping slightly in front of Lily, his posture protective. The world of shadows he knew so well had breached the fragile bubble of light they had been in. "Adrian," Lily whispered, a hint of fear in her voice. "What is it?" "They are here," he said simply, his voice low but steady. He did not look back at her. His focus was on the approaching threat. Years of experience had taught him to act before thinking, to protect first and question later. The men in the car were professionals, and Adrian recognized their style immediately. They were here to test him, to see if his growing attachment to someone innocent could be exploited. His chest tightened with both anger and fear. He would not let them touch her. Not for the world. The confrontation was swift. Adrian moved with calculated precision, disarming and incapacitating the assailants with a cold efficiency that made his pulse steady, despite the adrenaline. Lily clutched his arm, wide-eyed, yet she did not pull away. Instead, she whispered his name, a mix of awe and worrying, grounding him even as danger surrounded them. When the threat was neutralized and the black sedan sped away, Adrian finally exhaled, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability. He turned to Lily, who was trembling slightly, her hands still gripping his. "You must promise me," he said, his tone both urgent and tender, "that you will not put yourself in danger again. I cannot lose you." Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "I trust you, Adrian," she said softly. "That is all I have." For the first time, he understood the depth of his own emotions. Protecting her was no longer about duty or instinct. It was about the heartbeat he had been too afraid to admit existed inside him. The danger had reminded him of what he could lose, and the thought of her life threatened had awakened a fierce protectiveness he could no longer deny. As they walked home in silence, their hands brushing occasionally, Adrian realized something profound. He could not retreat into the shadows any longer, not when she had become his light, his fragile glimpse of hope in a world built on violence. The shadows were still there, but now they were only a backdrop to the possibility of something more. Chapter 7. Heartbeats kill death. Night air was thick with tension as Adrian and Lily moved through the deserted streets, alert to every whisper of movement. Danger had a way of creeping in quietly, and tonight, it seemed to linger closer than ever. Adrian's senses were heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every distant sound a possible attack. Yet despite the fear and adrenaline, his focus remained unwaveringly on Lily. She walked beside him, her steps cautious but steady. Her hand brushed against his accidentally, and for a fleeting moment, the world fell away. Adrian felt a pulse in that touch, a warmth he had not known existed in his cold, calculated life. It was a heartbeat that belonged to someone who trusted him completely, and it unsettled him in the best possible way. Suddenly, figures emerged from the darkness. This time, there was no hesitation. Adrian moved like a force of nature, intercepting the threat with precise, controlled action. He disarmed, deflected, and subdued the attackers in a blur. His movements fluid and merciless, yet all the while keeping Lily shielded behind him. When the danger passed, he turned to her, expecting fear, maybe even tears. Instead, he saw determination. She had followed his every move, her courage shining through the shock. Adrian felt a rush of emotion he could not name, pride, relief, something far deeper that tightened his chest. "You were reckless," he said, his voice low, but the edge of worrying had softened. "I am not afraid," she replied, her voice steady, her eyes meeting his. "Not when I am with you." The words hit him harder, than any attack ever could. In that moment, Adrian understood that their connection had deepened beyond mere trust or fascination. There was something raw, something unbreakable forming between them. His heart, long hardened by years of darkness, thudded erratically in his chest. As he realized he had never felt anything like this, Lily stepped closer, her hand finding his, and the proximity sent a shiver through him. He wanted to pull away, to protect her from himself, from the danger that clung to him, yet every fiber of his being screamed to stay. She was no longer just someone to protect. She was a part of him, an anchor in a world where he had never had one. "I cannot lose you," he admitted. The words rough but sincere. "You won't," she whispered, her lips brushing against his in a fleeting, electrifying touch. "Not if I can help it." The kiss was brief, yet it carried the weight of promises unspoken, of hearts daring to collide, despite the peril surrounding them. Adrian's hands rested gently on her arms, his touch firm yet tender, as if trying to convey all the words he could not say. In that heartbeat, the world outside the shadows, the enemies, the violence faded, leaving only them. For the first time, Adrian allowed himself to truly believe that love could exist even for someone like him. And for the first time, he wanted it more than he feared it. Chapter 8. Joyce's of the Hearth City was quiet in the early hours, but Adrian's mind was anything but still. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at the walls that had once felt like sanctuary, but now seemed suffocating. The events of the past weeks replayed relentlessly, the missions, the threats, the stolen moments with Lily. Every memory pulled him into directions, toward the safety of solitude he had always known, and toward the warmth and vulnerability she had awakened in him. He ran a hand through his hair, the tension in his shoulders betraying the storm inside. Loving Lily meant exposing himself in ways he had avoided for years. It meant risking not only his heart, but hers as well. The thought of her being hurt because of him made his chest tighten. He had spent his life ensuring survival, and yet here he was, considering a life that could end in ruin simply because he dared to care. A soft knock on the door drew his attention. Lily stood there, wrapped in a simple coat, her eyes bright even in the dim light of the hallway. "Adrian," she said quietly, "I know something is troubling you. You don't have to face it alone." He studied her face, the concern in her gaze piercing through the walls he had built. He wanted to retreat, to tell her to leave, and forget she had ever entered his life. But he couldn't. Every instinct he had built for survival fought against the pull of his heart. Yet he realized that without her, the darkness felt heavier, colder, more consuming than ever before. "I can't give you the life you deserve," he admitted, his voice strained. I'm not like other men. My world isn't safe." Lily stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "I don't need perfect, Adrian," she said softly. "I just need you. I want to face it with you, not away from you." Her words struck him like a revelation. He had spent so long protecting her from himself that he hadn't considered she might choose to stand beside him willingly. And in that choice, in that trust, Adrian found clarity. He exhaled slowly, the weight of indecision lifting just slightly. "Then I choose you," he said, his voice firm, tinged with vulnerability. "No matter the risk, no matter the danger, I choose us." Lily's smile was radiant, and for the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to feel hope without reservation. He reached for her, pulling her into a protective embrace, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. The city outside remained indifferent, the shadows looming as always, but inside that small apartment, something fragile and real had taken root. For the first time, Adrian understood that love was not a weakness, but a choice, a deliberate act of courage, and he would choose it, again and again, even in a world that demanded ruthlessness and survival. Chapter 9. Redemption's edgeth night was heavy with tension, the kind that pressed on the chest and made every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. Adrian moved through the city with precise steps, alert to every flicker of movement, every hint of threat. This was the culmination of everything he had fought to survive, the enemies who had haunted him, the consequences of a life built on violence, and the one person he could not afford to lose. Lily's safety weighed on him more than his own life ever had. She had chosen to stand beside him, and now that choice became his responsibility. He knew the stakes. A single misstep could shatter the fragile bond they had built, and he could not bear the thought of her being hurt because of him. The confrontation came suddenly, as it always did in his world. Shadows shifted along the alleyways, figures emerging with lethal intent. Adrian's instincts took over. Every movement was controlled, fluid, precise. He disarmed and incapacitated, his mind focused entirely on neutralizing the threat before it reached Lily. In the chaos, she was close, her courage unyielding even as the danger pressed in. Adrian caught her hand, guiding her behind him, ensuring she remained safe while he faced the onslaught. Her presence steadied him, her trust acting as both anchor and motivation. He fought not for pride, not for revenge, but for the heartbeat that mattered most in his life. The final enemy fell, subdued by Adrian's skill and determination. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by their ragged breathing. Adrian turned to Lily, his chest heaving with adrenaline and relief. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough but tender. She nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of awe and trust. "I am, because you're here," she said softly. Her hand found his, and the simple touch grounded him in a way that nothing else could. Adrian's mind raced as he surveyed the aftermath. Every choice, every life he had taken, had led him here, not to redemption in the eyes of the world, but to the redemption of his own heart. He had proven to himself that he could protect, that he could care, and that love was not a liability, but a force strong enough to guide him through the darkness. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond violence, beyond the shadows that had defined him for so long. He could see a life where Lily's hand was in his, where their hearts beat in sync without fear. The path to redemption was not easy, but in her presence, it felt attainable. Adrian drew her close, the world outside still dangerous and unpredictable, but for that moment, their hearts were aligned. The man feared as a killer had found a purpose beyond survival, a reason to fight not for blood, but for love, trust, and the fragile promise of a life rebuilt together. Chapter 10. A killer's heartbeat. First rays of dawn spilled across the city, painting the streets in gold and soft pinks. Adrian stood on the rooftop of his building, the wind tugging at his coat, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of the darkness lift slightly. The world was still dangerous, still unrelenting, but it no longer felt insurmountable. Not when Lily Evans was by his side. She stepped beside him, her hand finding his, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged together. Her presence grounded him, her warmth dissolving the shadows that had clung to him for so long. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not only the kindness in her eyes, but the fierce courage that had refused to be intimidated by his world. "You're quiet," she said softly, leaning her head slightly against his shoulder. "I'm thinking," he admitted, his voice low, "about how much has changed, about what you've done for me, about what you've made me want." She smiled, the kind of smile that could ignite hope in the coldest heart. "You don't have to say it," she whispered. "I can see it in your eyes." Adrian pulled her close, holding hers if he could shield her from all the dangers the world might throw their way. He had once believed that love was a weakness, that attachment only brought vulnerability and pain. But Lily had taught him otherwise. Love, he realized, was not a threat. It was a heartbeat, a steady, enduring rhythm that could pierce even the deepest shadows. "I promise," he murmured against her hair. "I will do everything to keep us safe. Everything to make sure this life, our life, is worth it." Lily tilted her face up to him, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and charged with the intensity of everything they had endured. It was a kiss that spoke of trust, of passion, and of hearts that had found each other despite the odds. When they parted, Adrian rested his forehead against hers, breathing in her scent, committing the moment to memory. The city below continued its ceaseless rhythm, but up here, on this rooftop, there was only them, only the soft, steady beat of hearts that had survived the darkness and now dared to dream of a future together. Adrian had once been feared as a killer, a man of shadows and precision. Now he was a man who had learned the power of vulnerability, the strength of love, and the courage it took to let someone in. Lily's hand in his was more than comfort. It was a promise, a light, and a heartbeat that would guide him forward. For the first time, Adrian smiled without reservation, fully aware that the hardest battles were behind him and the most meaningful ones were just beginning. Together, they would face the world, not as predator and prey, not as darkness and light, but as two hearts beating in unison, daring to believe that love could conquer even the deepest shadows.